outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good morning and welcome to the Weekly Review. I'm your host, Paul Hazard, and with me this morning are Catherine Taylor, John Gibbs, and Leanne Lax. You're all very welcome. Everybody doing well?
Very.
Good. Well, it's been a busy week in education and lots happened. And the next holiday is the Christmas holidays, but we're going to hope to make that journey a little bit more pleasant by reviewing 3 news stories of the week and recommending 4 super shows for you to help you sharpen your pencil. But we're going to tackle the first of those stories after these words from our sponsors.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. John Catt have an exceptional collection of book titles that cover a range of educational topics, ideas and research. The books are aimed at forward-thinking schools and support best practice teaching for both primary and secondary education. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK, home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the programme with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
Welcome back. Children's reading is at crisis point, so the National Literacy Trust tells us. Frank Cottrell Boyce, the Children's Laureate, says, "We know that children who read for pleasure and children who read for pleasure and children who are readers gain all kinds of benefits, from the increased vocabulary to vastly improved mental well-being." But Jonathan Douglas, the chief executive of the NLT, says the futures of a generation are being put at risk by this drop in reading. John, could you tell us, just so our listeners are fully aware, what is reading for pleasure? In reality, what is it? Why is it important? And why is it in decline?
Well, I'm imagining, because we're teachers, that we're going to. I could easily launch into and I will, if you like, a eulogy for the joys of teaching. Teaching, yes, that as well. Reading, yeah. And but reading certainly. I mean, of course, I encourage my kids to read. I read. My parents read. The trip to the library was a thing when I was a childhood. In my childhood, my parents always came with lots of books. My mum was reading books, and so on. So I value that. I think it's important. I think it extends intellectual ability. It's a joy in itself, and so on. Yeah. However, I bet, with all the panics that we have occasionally about young people reading books, the people currently alive on this island are the most literate generation ever. But they may well be literate. That's probably true even in book reading terms, although they'll read books in different ways. They'll read graphic novels, they'll listen to audio books, and they'll read all sorts of stuff. So I bet literacy is changing rather than necessarily in crisis. However, if anyone's listening to this, read books. Yes, of course, read books. There's all sorts of good reasons for reading books. And I hope nothing puts you off the joys of reading books. I think there are a number of things we might well get onto that might explain why book reading in our old-fashioned sense, my age, I can say things are old-fashioned. In my old-fashioned sense, book reading has declined, and I'm sorry for that. And I could identify, I'd guess, and I bet we will, reasons for that. But yes, read books by all means.
Yeah. Catherine, John makes the point that we've never been more literate, and that people do a lot of reading. It might not be the traditional kind of reading, the kind of books that we have and we get them from libraries and bookshops and so on. But there's a lot of, children who read things on social media and so on and different places. Now, we maybe refer to those as deficit texts. Is it cool to be a young person and a reader?
Well, I'm not sure about cool. I certainly, in my school, we have a lot of the kind of of children who I'm amazed they don't fall over, because they literally will walk along doing this, and you have to tell them to put their book away so you can teach your lesson. And if you stop talking to draw breath, they'll have got it out again and it's under the table. So I do see a lot of kids like that. But I've got a full disclosure. I didn't. For my GCSE English, and this is going back to 1990 something, I didn't read the text. I got it on an audiobook on a cassette, and I got a B, so there. But the idea is that there's certain kinds of people, myself included, who really loves an audiobook, and I don't think that's a problem. I don't think graphic novels are necessarily a problem. Some are of higher quality than others, but they're great. And even going out and about, just reading signs for things, and we always emphasize to our son, we know this because we read the sign, and you've got to read the information. We went, we go to a museum, read the information, go on the bus, read the timetable, whatever it is. So yeah, I think I agree with John. It's not in decline. I think it's probably changing, and I do feel a frustration sometimes when I hear about teachers who will ban graphic novels and say, because it's like that idea, if you're exercising, you're lapping the guy on the couch. If you're reading a graphic novel, you're lapping the person who's not reading anything at all. And I just think it's discouraged something. You've got to just find their interests, I mean, we bought my son a Doctor Who book, and within 3 days he can tell you anything about Doctor Who, but he won't read a story book. So it's you've got to find their interests and be prepared to be flexible and not snobbish, I think.
Yeah. I'm going to come back, Catherine, and ask you just about, what's going on in your school, that you have so many children who are walking around reading books.
We are a selective grammar school.
Well, I just want to ask Leanne, first of all, Frank Cottrell-Boyce, the children's laureate, tells us that reading is an invisible privilege. And maybe that fits in with what you're saying there, Catherine. Yeah. And the OECD would support that very much. And in 2010, their report said reading for pleasure is more important than family socioeconomic status. So, Leanne, what is the role of the individual teacher in schools in increasing reading frequency and reading for pleasure?
I think following on from what Catherine said, I think, and as an early years teacher in my past few years, that reading is everywhere and it doesn't have to be a book. But reading a street sign is possibly not the same as reading a bit of fiction. So yeah, reading is everywhere and kids can read everywhere, but there is still a need for fiction because that's one of the main places we get our imaginations from. It is fiction reading. I think in terms of reading as well, I really believe that it's one of the life skills that we teach in school. We teach a lot of stuff in school, primary and high school. Teaching reading is that one life skill that we teach that you really can't be that successful in life without it. And I think that it's not an individual teacher that can yes, make the difference, and yes, can provide awe and wonder. But I think it has to be a team effort between home and school, home and teacher. If I'm sending books home, we need parents to help read them with the children. And then if children are choosing a library book, let's say in their school library, and they're excited about it, we need that kind of excitement to spread into the home as well. And I think it bounces back from home to teacher, but you need both. I think it's very important.
Yeah. Catherine, is there anything you could add to that? I mean, I know you said,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, what I would say, being the proud owner of a reluctant reader, we read to him, and I think that's, I think that's really important as well. And I do agree that it's the home school relationship. Certainly, you can supplement it by reading to them, by encouraging them to, but I will get a lot more enjoyment from reading a book with him that we've chosen together, rather than trying to force him to read a book he's been given that he hates. That's just painful. And so it's about, I think it is letting them follow their interests if they are reluctant.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that's the way in.
I think the best way, to do it also is to invite parents in to read with the child in school. I think that's the best way to form those relationships and to form reading for pleasure relationships.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Super strategy. Yeah. Martin Richards tells us his local library is being closed because too few people are using it. That's very unfortunate. But the fact that it was recently relocated to the third floor of a new building with access by elevators in a grey concrete corridor may have been a factor. It may and well indeed, Martin. Just to finish off on this, I suppose one of the worries I have is if children are not readers, I wonder, what the logical conclusion is. And I remember reading recently, I believe it was Oxford or somewhere, was no longer recommending full texts to their students because they couldn't read them. And last week, Canterbury University has cancelled an English literature degree. Is that not, very tragic, to say the least?
Yeah. If I say something about that, the pressures of getting kids through GCSE is a bugbear of mine, and I think the reading small bits and choosing certain texts that you get the kids that choose Mice and Men. That's the themes are easy to understand and so on. We talked about the other week. Read a small bit of Shakespeare. Don't read the whole play, because you can pick out the things you'll need to learn for the exam and so on. So lots of students, I think, go through quite long periods of their secondary school education having done quite well in English, never having read a full text. And that no wonder when they go to university, and many universities, and they're told to read this by next Wednesday, it's a gargantuan task.
Yeah.
There's very last thing on this. I've been trying to encourage my A-level students to read for their anthologies, read some of their texts for religious studies. And what I find quite useful, just to bring in technology, is to use AI to generate a summary, so you know what you're going into and you've got your head in the right space, but also some comprehension questions so that it scaffolds their reading and it breaks it down for them. And that would be a massive workload issue for an individual teacher to undertake. But I find AI really helpful to actually prepare that scaffolding, because I know that when they go to university, they are going to have to sit down with dense texts and they need to have the skill built in. So I think AI can help us there.
Should we as teachers, we're out of time on this issue, but should we read to children? And I know in primary school that's one thing, but in post-primary school, there was a phase, I was at school in that phase, when it was really frowned upon if a teacher, took time out of the English syllabus to read a short story, or over a month, say, read a novel or something. Now, my teacher did do that. We loved it. We absolutely loved it. But I know he got his knuckles rapped for doing it. But here I am, decades later, committed reader and all the rest. Should we not just...
I'd read a poem to get the emphasis and to put the, use your voice to convey something, there would be sections I'd read. I don't think that's problematic. I don't think I'd read a whole book, but I'm an RS teacher. The book is very, very long.
I'm with you, Paul. I absolutely loved being read to. I've always loved being read to. I love audiobooks. Audiobooks. And being read to by a good reader. And if a teacher's a reasonable reader and can do a few voices, bring a bit of pace into it, it's absolutely. In primary school, it was Friday afternoon, and you'd wait for it the way you used to wait for a next episode of Doctor Who. You know, it was like, wait, and they'd say, "Well, remember what happened last week? Yeah, what happened last week? Do you think they'll do this? Yes, we are," and so on. It was absolutely delightful.
Great, yeah. Leanne, we had a comment there. It's just gone off the screen. Yes, Clara Lynn Hawking is telling us. Well, she's saying that Martin Richards' comment about his library closing is very sad. I think we all agree with that. And Gen Z, do we say Gen Z or Gen Z? I don't know. Gen Z outperforms millennials in visits to physical libraries. This also corresponds to Gen Z's preference for printed books. I might propose the library put those books in storage because trends indicate that they will need to reopen. When Gen Z becomes parents, they will push for this. And indeed, what goes around comes around. That's all we've time for on this story. We'll be back after this message. Now, following on from our last story, if I said to you, Napoleon is always right and I will work harder, would you know what I was talking about? That is, of course, Boxer, the horse from Animal Farm. Now, to my mind, there are Premiership footballers and then there are teachers. And the pressure is constantly on both of us to perform better. As Boxer says, I will work harder. But we don't have the support network that Premiership footballers do, or at least I don't think we do anyhow. What I'm really saying is there was an article last week that talked about the struggle to spot and develop effective teachers. And it got me kind of wondering, well, what is a modern day effective teacher? I mean, is it somebody who just, always has to work harder? Teaching's very complex. And teachers have a breadth of skills, capabilities, competences, and, we carry out a lot of roles and responsibilities. Leanne, do you think realistically we can define a modern day effective teacher? Is it not too broad?
Yeah, I think with the behaviour we're seeing coming into schools now, you're going to need teachers to be half psychologist, half educator, half teacher. I don't know how, maybe the degree has to change.
Yeah, you teach the kind of maths I teach, just 3 halves doesn't equal to 1. I'm interrupting you, sorry.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if the degree needs to be changed or looked at, or the PGCE has to be looked at more, but I think that psychology is going to have to play a bigger part in the training of teachers going forward, and child psychology, to be specific, how the brain works, how to make changes to mindsets. I think that's going to have to be quite a big part of the training of new teachers going forward.
Mm-hmm. And John, teacher effectiveness is fluid, it's dynamic. It's always changing. It depends on myriad factors, which school you're in. Catherine teaches in a school where children are going around reading. Some of the schools I taught in, if you held a book in your hand, you get yourself beaten up at break time. We have different knowledge, we're in different locations. Talk to me about teacher effectiveness. Can it be measured? Should we bother about teacher effectiveness in terms of defining and measuring it?
That's a tough question, isn't it? Because it's clearly, and I don't mind saying it's a tough question, because the chap that wrote the article, Matthew Kraft, who it starts the article says, I've been studying this for decades, or something like that. And then the article concludes by I still really don't know the answer. So I feel I'm in good company. I think this is fine. I think asking the question, what makes a good teacher, and how you assess that, and should you assess that, And to what degree you should be assessing teachers in their ability to teach and so on, if we don't really know what it is and we recognize that it's a fluid and evolving definition, then the answer is probably we should be asking this question, but we shouldn't expect to know the answer. And I think we regularly expect to know the answer and think we do. And that's been a problem throughout teaching, is that every now and again you say, we know how to teach, but this is how to do it. It'll be invariably changed or wrong or have unintended consequences, like insisting on, as these schools, one story you regularly see in the press these days is schools that have sort of directed lesson planning, where the central management will say, this is how you teach, these are the lessons, this is the structure, because we've cracked it. Well, you're a cleverer person than me if you have, and you're a cleverer person than Matthew Kraft if you've learned what good teaching is and how to assess it. I think the answer is proceed with good intentions and recognize that that you will, as Leanne says, you will have to recognize that schools exist not in a vacuum, but in a society that will change over time, and different schools will be right for different teachers, and different teachers will teach different subjects well, and they'll teach well and badly. They'll teach well, or they'll feel happier at different times of their career.
Yeah,
and I'm hesitant. You can see I'm hesitating about the words I use about good and bad teaching, because again, I'm suggesting that's more socially defined than we realize.
Yeah. I think we're all very different as well. I mean, if you teach in P1, it's very different from teaching, A-level French. We all do completely very different things. I remember a while ago, they put some actors and politicians and so on into a classroom for a week, this reality TV or whatever it is. I don't think they'll ever do that again. But one of the conclusions, I think, to the show was that so much of teacher effectiveness is a very innate, a very tacit kind of knowledge. Catherine, I wonder then, because we've all got those frameworks of competencies and lists, and Northern Ireland, it's like, you need a degree to decode some of them. They're all letters and numbers and all. I mean, how useful are those competencies, and really, who are they for?
It's a $1 million question, isn't it? And I agree with John that we definitely have this. If you think you've cracked it, you probably haven't. And I know that it's a show that John's going to reference later on, but there was a show this week from Danny, which was all about the teacher and the fads, and going through the things that have gone through over the years, and this idea that there seems to be a need for knowledge for how a strategy works, what the benefits are, application in your context, and then not leaning too far either into sort of, like, for example, scripting. We might have certain things which are scripted because they need to be accurate, but we might have certain amount of flexibility to explore and explain things for the context that we're in. So I think if you think you've cracked it, you haven't cracked it, and we need to have good CPD, because I believe that teacher agency comes from their ability to notice what strategy is needed and to apply it properly and appropriately. And so if your CPD is not working, you don't have the tools in your toolkit to be able to deploy. So I would argue that you're not, as someone looking at a lesson, you're not saying, are whiteboards being used? You're seeing whether they're used and then asking the teacher for their rationale for why they did or didn't use that. And the rationale has to carry some weight. When I deal a lot with the ECTs, if I go into a lesson, I don't know necessarily all of the context or what's gone before or what's coming next. So if I say, I might have used mini whiteboards there, why didn't you? If they give me a rationale, I'm satisfied. I'm not going to mark them down because they didn't or whatever. If they can give me a coherent reason why they chose not to at that point in time, that's what I'm interested in, not whether the technique was there or not. So it's when they can't tell you, that's when I think there's a problem.
Well, and that could be, if we could carry that on. I mean, there is a kind of crisis of confidence in the profession, or certain areas of the profession anyhow, I could say. And I mean, this whole business of productivity, measuring productivity, performativity, pay issues, conditions, this kind of soft surveillance, as we call it. All these things combine to kind of form a sort of a storm of obstruction, barriers, and obstacles to teacher effectiveness. Just very quickly, open to all three of you. One of the things I think is if teaching was made more professional again, if we could stand in ourselves and in our rooms with confidence and assurance and, teach in a way that is effective for the groups in front of us, who are all different as well. But how could we make teaching, more professional? Just very quickly.
Well, I'll pick up on
CPD pipeline and give people time to actually learn and actually engage with the most recent evidence and apply it in their context. Sorry, I spoke over you. I'm very passionate about this.
It was open to everybody.
I was going to agree with you anyway. It's, I was going to say that your emphasis on agency and personal reflection. It's when you're directed, or there's a fad, or there's a way of doing it, as you so eloquently said. I mean, it's when you think it's like quantum physics. If you understand it, you probably don't. And that sense, I think, of I was listening to a guest on another show, which I thought was a very good show a few weeks ago, and he said, well, there was a time when teachers there were three different history teachers in the school. One was teaching medieval history because he liked it. One was teaching world history because they liked that. And that was a terrible thing. And I thought, well, I don't know, it was such a terrible thing in a way. I like teachers to be able to explore and express themselves and and if you look at places like Finland, we always mention Finland, but if you do, that's sort of what's going on there. And as Catherine says, they won't be a free for all. It'll be, why are you doing this? And if you can explain it, it's very true.
I think you teach differently when you teach a subject or an objective that you're passionate about.
Yes,
the kids notice.
Very definitely. Yes, very definitely. Yeah. And JB Elder, one of our regular listeners, says that we'll keep that one on, but in a previous comment, Leanne, he talked about the importance and emphasis being placed on mentoring for much longer. And that ties in with his next comment. One of the keys is to be yourself in the room, but I actually think that's very different. I know, Leanne, you talked about the need for psychology in initial teacher education and so on, but it is to kind of fill that sense of confidence, to stand in that room, to be yourself and to radiate that confidence, which comes passion and so on out to those children. It's absolutely priceless to be able to do that. But we're way over time on this story today. On to our final story after this message. Now, this week, Bridget Phillipson, the Minister for Education, has put some flesh on the bones for Labour's vision. She argues a sole focus on achieving is doomed to fail. Very glad to hear her say that. I think she's referring specifically to exams, and it's not to rule them out, but when that is the sole focus, hothousing, call it what you want, it's doomed to fail. She added, the government will always be strong on standards, glad to hear that, but those standards will forever be in pursuit of what is best for children. Because if we fall into that trap of chasing a narrow shade of standards, structures driven rather than child focused, then children with SEND get swept to the side and attendance crashes. Important as they are, I didn't think she needed to focus, her comments on SEND and attendance. I think they apply to everybody throughout education. Catherine, better attendance and well-being are high on the Minister's agenda for school improvement. But I'm just wondering, are these ambitions great, laudable and all as they are, but are they not really lofty? What school is realistically going to forego driving towards exams to pull back and focus on, well-being and all these things she mentions?
Well, I mean, I do want to bring back in SEND and attendance, because I mean,
I'm not ruling them out. I just
no,
think
no,
that-
no, no. I understand what you're saying. I just
Mhm.
feel quite strongly that it's great to have these ideals. We'd love them for everybody. I think that's absolutely brilliant. And it feels a bit like whataboutery, because I do appreciate that this is a big, grand arch statement, and there will be things that sit underneath it. But there's the structures that kind of help meet the needs of the ones who are struggling are in many ways inadequate and absent in some cases. And so you've got to scaffold this if you want it, and that will involve investment in SEND and all kinds of things, because it would be a rather strange thing to not want these outcomes, but I think that there are stages and steps and scaffolds that are missing to be able to realise them. I do also agree that we need to not focus entirely on results, but actually I feel like that hasn't really been going on for a little while. And, I think there will be different schools who celebrate their Progress 8 or whatever it is on Twitter or what have you. But ultimately, it's not been about data for quite a while. So I'm not sure that there's much. I mean, it's great to hear it articulated, and I'd love to see it happen, and I'd love the structures to be in place, but I'm not convinced this is new, if that makes sense.
Well, I thought it was maybe a bit new for a government minister.
Say it, yes, but I think since 2019 Ofsted, the data's kind of not been so much on the card.
I actually did begin. I read the entirety of her speech. It's very interesting. There's an awful lot more detail in it as well. And I did begin to think, actually, do you know what? We might actually have a Minister for Education who has a smidgen of intelligence and perhaps even a little bit of poetry, or dare I say, a soul. Talk about the absence epidemic is the canary in the coal mine for belonging in our country. And I thought, wow, now that's quite a statement. And there's a lot of thought has gone into that. But that's a very kind of dangerous foreshadowing of what could happen in the next few years. And of course, schools are very much microcosms of society to come. Leanne, that sense of belonging is really, really important. We all know how transformative it really can be. But how do schools develop, foster, and grow a sense of belonging? What has to happen for that to be there?
I think you need a sense of community within a school. Like you say, schools are microcosms, and part of that is your school being its own mini community. I think, like I said before, with reading, the way to do that is invite parents into the building. Not at 6 o'clock at night for parents' evening, but during the day. Come and learn with your child, come and read with your child in the morning. And I think all those kinds of things help the children to know that the parent is part of school and that the parent is hopefully on board with what the school are doing. And all those things together, I think, contribute towards well-being. And that if your parent and your mother or your father is going into school with you and they're literally some days walking into the building, sitting down and reading with you, or maybe doing a maths lesson with you, it changes the mindset of the child as well, to think maybe like, oh, mommy and daddy are coming and sitting doing it with me and they can do it, so I think I can do it.
Yeah, good, yeah. John, the minister then goes on to, much as I'm praising her potential anyhow, he does go on to say that they have raised tuition fees. And effectively, in my book, that puts a lot of prestigious education, courses at university and so on, out of the reach of disadvantaged families. Is that not running counter to belonging and, having opportunities for all?
Yeah, I think it's an important direction to go in, because a lot of this change and I hope Catherine's right, the tide is going out. You know, the changes, there's been an alteration over the last couple of years away from marketization, away from data driven, away from managerialism. And hopefully the direction we're going in is a greater appreciation, not only of belonging and so on, but what that actually means is equity and fairness. And there isn't an easy way to fund universities. If you fund them like when I went off and was given a grant and had no fees and so on, that was because 6% of the population went to university, or 5%. You can't expand it the way we have and fund it the way we used to be. It's a shame, and it wouldn't necessarily be fair either. What we have to have is a means of funding universities, and paying something back from the privilege of going to university is fine by me in a way, some sort of tax, maybe time limited, but it isn't fair. And it is, as you rightly say, Paul, the system we've got is deterring certain groups of people going to university. It is easier for some than others. Some have the bank of mum and dad, others don't. Some will be fearing debts and so on. So we have to look seriously at the way we encourage all people to feel they can go to university if they are able to, and that's not the funding process. So putting equity in the foreground rather than that's that I can't think how I'm going to finish that sentence. That's the main thing.
Yeah, I think also that universities need, and specific degree courses need, better links to industry, so that after you graduate, you have a straight link into jobs and into careers and into like apprenticeships. Because I think a lot of children go to university and don't have a direct line to a career afterwards, not a job, but a career afterwards. And if they're going to raise fees, they need to raise ways of children coming out and straight into careers where they can pay back the fees.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Well, that's all we have time for. We'll be watching that story very closely, and after this, we'll be back with our shows of the week. I'll start off this week. I listened to Darren Lester's show yesterday morning. It was about self-affirmation. I've said it before. Darren's shows are like a Michelin-starred meal. They are structured, they are beautiful, they are highly anticipated, they are mouth-watering, they are succulent-inducing, and you feel really satisfied after listening to them. Fantastic. I don't know how he does it, but so grateful that he does it week after week. The line that hooked me, I'll just read it. He said, "We quite often forget in education, we are in the business of threatening students' sense of self." How could you not listen after a line like that? It's so gripping. But he went on to an exploration of students' self-affirmation and its contribution in closing the attainment gap and so on. And he talked a lot about teachers. When you give feedback, do you ever kind of get into the child's inner life? You know, when they write an essay, ask them, you know, are they proud of that essay or proud of parts of it and so on, you know? And really that whole kind of personal, kind of affective education came through really strongly in that show. Great show, total inspiration. Catherine, what have you been listening to this week?
I've been listening to the Morning Break with Carl Smith, and why doesn't anyone want to be a school leader anymore? And I found it really, really interesting. And his guest came on and she talked a lot about her role. And I think one of the main things that came out of it for me was the idea that you need to find a leadership role which meets with your interests. And, you know, right at the beginning of the show, I made a comment about guiding children to read according to their interests. And it turns out, this is psychology we all need to learn about. It turns out that adults are quite driven by what they're interested in too. And, how people should look for roles which are situated within a strong and supportive team, where you surround yourself with people who complement your competencies, and that you pursue something that you're already passionate about. And I thought that was a really strong message. And I look forward to a world in which there are opportunities for people to sort of realise their educational dreams, I suppose, and interests in a positive way that feeds back into the system.
Good. Thank you. Yeah. John, any good shows this week?
Yeah, I was listening, as Catherine mentioned earlier, I was listening to the Late Show with Danny. Classroom Craze, ones that transformed and ones that tumbled. It was a kind of sliced bread, if you listen to that on Radio 4. The kind of, are things are good, whether do these things turn out to be really good or just passing fads. And the overall theme of the show, what I liked about the show first was structure. There was Danny was just basically talking about from her own experience over 10 years of teaching, but also taking lots of questions during the show. It was a real piece of classic interactive radio in that lots of people on the late show so had the energy to message in, and she was responding to their questions. So it was a good analysis of things, of the big picture, which was the crazes, or rather the fads, which moved in one direction towards child-centered Kagan type teaching, group work and so on, or slipped back towards direct instruction and so on, which is that sort of paradigm is as old as the hills, and it gets different names, but it comes and goes. And as we said earlier, there's no answer to it, but it was great to listen to that debate, and it was dealt with in a very balanced sort of way.
Well, when you're in this game, as long as you and I are, John, you see it all coming back round, don't you? It's just a new name. It's just a new name, but it comes back round. Leanne, I think you're going to tell us about an upcoming show, are you?
Oh, no, I'm going back a week.
Oh, you're going back a week.
I wanted to do my week show of the week is a Sunday show, so hopefully we are okay with that because it's not from Monday, but the Sunday people always miss out because we go on a Sunday morning. So I wanted to go a bit rogue, Paul, and just pull up a comment from Martin, who's been watching. He talks about having a few improv sessions to build his confidence when he started teaching. And I pulled it up because my show of the week was the Sunday Social with Toria, and it's called Armed with Only a Whiteboard and a Pen, Teaching Without Tech. And I wanted to just reach out, whoever's listening, if there are ECTs listening, I really suggest it. It's a great watch. Don't always rely on the tech because sometimes it doesn't work. And a whiteboard pen will never let you down. So I think, yeah, if you're an ECT and you're watching, that's a great show for you to listen to. There's lots of strategies, lots of discussion on not needing a computer to teach all the time. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, I am going to recommend an upcoming show on Tuesday, the 19th of November. It is International Men's Health Day. But this week, in honor of that, Chris Wilkinson is going to dedicate his Thursday Late show to men in education, mental health, and so on. And Brent and I will be joining him on that show. It's bound to be good. But that's all we have time for today on our show. We do like it when you let us know what you think of the show, so please tell us on our Twitter X, on our YouTube, or wherever, or just send us a message somehow. Thank you very much to our sponsors today, John Catt Books and Reading Solutions. Thank you to our panelists, John Gibbs, Catherine Taylor, and Leanne Lax, who's also doing all the production as well. Have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday on the Weekly Review. Same time, same place. Goodbye.